Hello, hello. I see like a lot of fresh faces, old faces. I see a lot of fresh faces. I see a lot of friends. Man, it's incredible. After 3 years, we are here. I would like to just say a shout out to the organizer and a round of applause for the DefCamp people. Thanks a lot for making this happen, and thanks a lot for bringing us together. So, my name is Dan. I work for this startup boutique company. You might have heard about it. I am missing my, okay, I can find it here, sorry. I am part of GREAT, which is called the Global Research and Analysis Team. This team was founded in 2008 within Kaspersky. We are actually focusing on things that are not like usual. We are focusing on highly advanced threat intelligence, highly advanced APT attacks. And you might have heard some of the things that my team has been publishing throughout those more than 10 plus years. But you know, the past is the past. Let's look at the present. And currently in the present, we are actually monitoring, we've been monitoring in the past like 2 years now, more than 900 operations and groups, like APT campaigns. We're not talking about like some off-the-shelf stealers or like keyloggers, et cetera, et cetera. No, we're talking about like mature campaigns, 900 of them. 20 of them are actually commercial, and this is pretty interesting. So if we want to talk about, just to give you a little overview of what we see and what kind of things that we are doing, we are researching APT attacks. And based on our knowledge, based on our research, based on our telemetry, we see that the most targeted like industries or targets are like governments, diplomatic and telecommunications, and military. And this is pretty interesting because this is what I'm going to talk about today. It's not going to be a talk about APT attacks. You can find that in our threat landscape, in our threat predictions that we are doing this quarter. But today we're going to talk about something else, something which in my opinion is more worrying, and I think it deserves to be discussed. We're going to talk about Balkanization. And when we are talking about Balkanization, let me put my timer right here. That's good. When we are talking about Balkanization, we have to actually define what is Balkanization. So, you know, historically, and where the term comes from, there was a time where countries or Europe was kind of fragmented. And in this fragmentation, in this like big changes, we've seen a lot of states which were like created, a lot of states we were like separated. Romania was also part of this Balkanization. And the definition of Balkanization is splitting a larger area, splitting a larger state into smaller parts. And you can see here, like in Yugoslavia, which was, as we know, in our history, this is when after I was born, so this is quite recent. Yugoslavia it's a good example. This is what Balkanization, splitting a larger chunk into smaller parts. But then the question is, what is internet Balkanization? Well, some people call it splinternet. I'm kind of old school, and I like to call it Balkanization, but nowadays cool kids are calling it splinternet. And the idea is the same. The principle is the same. You take the parts of the internet which was created, actually, it was meant to be a global, distributed, one internet where everybody could access it. You could access like any web server from any part of the world. Well, now it's not the case anymore. And we have current examples. We have current examples of China. We have current examples of India, North Korea, Iran. And I would like to point out Iran because it's actually quite sad what is happening back there with all the protests. And then immediately when the protests started, what did they do? They shut down the internet because governments understand that the internet is a super powerful tool. I was actually debating with a good friend of mine when I was creating this presentation, and he said that, you know, Back in the days, you had newspapers. But then think about it. Let's take an example of communist Romania. In communist Romania, you had newspapers. Here you had Scânteia. But that newspaper physically had to get to like each person, to the population. It was pretty hard to actually bring outside the newspaper, or like kind of people would say propaganda. It was quite hard to have a newspaper from the US brought into Romania in the 80s, in the 70s. It wasn't impossible, but it was quite hard. So the state was able, whoever was in control, was able to actually control the flow of information. But with the internet, the things changed. Actually, I would say the turning point was actually the radio. And you might remember Radio Free Europe, and then citizens of Romania listening, kind of hiding the fact that they were listening to Radio Free Europe. But it was there. The government couldn't completely block the radio signals that were coming to Romania. But what about the internet? Well, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to block. And, you know, I'm not going to go into what's like how and methods, how to do this kind of blocking. But, you know, Great Firewall of China, it's there. In Russia also, I would say it's kind of a Great Firewall, but not as strict as in China. Iran, you know, completely disconnected. And, you know, let's see some examples. You know, Tencent, it's the largest Chinese telecom company. They have everything. They're like this like huge company. And something that struck me, I'm actually a Dota player, so shout out to Dota players here. Yes, woo. I'm very bad Dota player, so. But you know, I was actually watching the international competition. Once a year they have like this huge event, huge competition, the international. And once it was in China. But it was pretty interesting because they weren't, the organizer, the main organizer was not Valve, actually a company who created Dota, sorry, who has now Dota 2, but actually Tencent. It was under Tencent. They had to organize it. And actually, a lot of events, a lot of movies, you cannot publish them, you cannot release them in China unless you go through Tencent. So this is one kind of separation, one kind of like Balkanization. Russian store. If you want to download some Android apps, you can download them from the Russian store, which is not like a Play Store. It's kind of like a Play Store, but it's not a Play Store. Also, anybody heard about this UserGate? UserGate? No? I didn't hear about them. Apparently, it's a next-gen vendor which creates firewall applications. And basically, it's kind of the same, you know, like you have Cisco, you have Fortinet, you have like Palo Alto. They offer the same things, but with their software. And, you know, lastly, let's talk about another example of COVID vaccines. So this is the Soberana. This is the Cuban vaccine. And what do you do? Like, maybe they didn't have access to Moderna or Pfizer or AstraZeneca. So they said, we're going to build it ourselves. So not only they built one, they have 6 different vaccines. And, you know, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. But the idea is that instead of everybody working together, everybody trying to go for the same aim, try to research and get the best vaccine ever, instead, you have this division, this split between countries, where somebody tries to do their own vaccine, Russians are trying to do their own vaccine, which I don't know if it's good or bad. The Cubans are trying to do their own vaccine, and everybody loses in my point of view. Anyway, I want to give you an overview of the things that happened in our past 2 years. And, you know, of course, 2022, those are the COVID years, and I think that, for sure, we are now in the cyber war years, and unfortunately, I don't know, this is a question mark, because I don't know when it's going to end, if it's going to end, so this is pretty, you know, like, quite sad, and it saddens me the most to see the war, to see the conflict in Ukraine, and I hope it will end, but realistically, I don't think it will end in next year. I don't know. I hope. I hope it will. What we've seen as a company, what we've seen based on our research in the cybersecurity, in the threat landscape, and the previous speakers, they also mentioned some of the attacks that happened in Ukraine. It's aligned with what also the industry is seeing. And you know, we have like the cyber attacks, we have like Black Energy 1 and 2, which you might know, and like this is pretty interesting. The power grid one, industry attack, industry over, and NotPetya, which was pretty interesting, like it's a wiper which was developed and delivered using a supply chain. I think my clicker broke. Oh, good, perfect. So we have this like, oops, let's go back. I can't go back. I can go back, sorry. So we have these attacks, the Bad Rabbit, and then recently in the active, close to the present state, we have like Gamaredon and Armageddon Ops, which are pretty interesting. You can read about them. They're like APT attacks, which are Gamaredon super active right now. They are like targeting a lot of institutions in Ukraine. These are like an overview of APT attacks that happened, and a special shout out to Red October, which was discovered in 2013. It was discovered by my team. It was there. It's not active anymore, but it's pretty interesting because it was one of the first APT attacks. Also, a special shout out to UNC 1151, Ghostwriter. You might know about it. Again. We've seen it a little bit, but we also believe that it's highly active right now in Ukraine. Now, during this war, we've seen an increase of cyber attacks in Ukraine, but not only in the Ukraine. And we've seen that those attacks, those cyber, let's say cyber operations, whatever you want to call them, are actually going beyond Ukraine and are affecting users from immediate regions. VSAT, 24th of February, like a lot of modems, VSAT modems, they went offline. VSAT, which is the satellite provider, they said, you know, guys, we lost connectivity, and we had like a lot of bricks, a lot of modems. It turns out were bricked. So how did this happen? Basically, from what you've seen right now, an attacker, which we believe it's Hades APT, which is like a Russian-speaking APT group, the Hades guys, they infiltrated the VSAT network. They managed to get access to the management network. They went there, and then they uploaded an update, a firmware update. Basically, the firmware update was a script that said, delete all your delete all your boot files or your firmware files. So the modems were actually booting, and they had no files to boot from. There was no Linux kernel. So they were kind of bricked. But the idea is that a lot of terminals in Europe and power plants, sorry, not power plants, but windmills were actually affected because, guess what? You need to have connectivity for those windmills for management. And instead of like getting fiber optic cables, you actually connect a modem, a satellite modem, and you do it. So this is one example of an attack that affected us. And then we have the geopolitical situation between Russia and Ukraine. And we have like kinetic military action. We have like cyber offensive risks that are increasing significantly for both countries. The idea is that we have different groups of attackers, maybe mercenaries or like pretty established attackers like APT groups, which are taking sides. So we have the Conti team. You might have heard about the Conti ransomware. The Conti teams, they actively took a stand pro-Russia. They said, you know, we're with Russia. Whatever you do, we're gonna come after you. And then we have like other groups which are taking the stand against Russia. They are like doing some sort of like attacks. There are like a lot of leaks. There's like basically a lot of things that are happening, and a lot of groups that are clashing with each other. And we've seen that there were the Conti leaks, which the Conti guys got hacked, and their chats were leaked. So there was this entire fiasco stuff. So the question remains, like, out of all those attacks, out of everything, are we affected? Does this cyber war affect us? And the answer is yes. So from what we've seen right now, what is happening in this cyber war in Ukraine? We have like non-APT activities, we have hacktivism, we have unattributed APTs, we have like DDoS attacks, and you might have heard about those DDoS attacks. And in 2023, things will not get like better, things will not get, the pace of the attacks will not get slower. We believe we will have more disruptions, more collateral damage, more supply chains attacks, more sophisticated attacks, and also, this is pretty interesting, and be very careful, cloud attacks, 2FA bypass, and 2FA fatigue. And when I say 2FA fatigue, I'm talking about, remember Uber attack, and remember how they actually got hacked. So now, I'd like to pause a bit and just think about what I said, and just to understand that this cyber war, which is happening on the internet, which is happening kind of close to us, close to Romania, it's not only affecting them, but it's actually affecting Romania as well, it's affecting EU, and actually it's affecting the entire world. And those attacks are not only targeted towards specific institutions from those countries, but actually are affecting our daily lives. And this is my main point about Balkanization, and you'll see some of I will point out some examples of how those attacks are actually affecting you and how Balkanization is actually bad for us. So my first example is those DDoS attacks that happened in, I would say, the early days of the war. So in March, in April. You might have heard about those attacks. You might have heard about like institutions, banks, governments, like pro-NATO, pro-EU, Europe, Ukraine groups doing DDoS attacks on Russian banks. And then we have like Russian actors doing DDoS attacks against institutions in Europe. Those attacks happened. And then what happened is that like in Europe, certain institutions came by and said, hey, you know, we need to protect ourselves against those DDoS attacks. So what are we going to do? We're gonna release these huge lists of DDoS attackers, and then we are going to force internet service providers to actually block those IP addresses. So this approach might be good or might be bad, but something to understand here is that those DDoS attacks existed way before. When I was doing my talk about honeypots, I was like having like millions of attackers, abusers, which were doing DDoS attacks to various honeypots, to various entities, which were private entities back then. There weren't a lot of government entities. And then those attacks were like pretty usual in the industry. So there wasn't anybody, no government agency coming and saying, hey, you know, we need to block those attackers at the country level. Because it's stupid. Like, you don't do that. And then, what happened in March is that those attacks happened, those DDoS attacks happened, and then we have certain institutions which issued those lists, and they said, you have to block this, you have to block this, you have to block this. And then the citizens of Europe, citizens of those specific countries, they couldn't access those IP addresses anymore. And then what happened, because they did it so fast, without any due diligence, without any proper verification, they started blocking legitimate websites. They started blocking legitimate businesses. And then you have to ask yourself, is this really the way to go? Is this really that some agency comes and says, you have to block this stuff, this part of the internet? Basically, they say, this part should not be reachable anymore by the citizens of this country. And then they add these legitimate businesses. And they say, oops, sorry, I did a mistake. Well, the question is, why did you do that in the first place? Why did you force those lists? Because, you know, a DDoS attack is a DDoS attack. You don't have to block it at the country level. You have different methods of protecting yourself against DDoS attacks. In those lists, I also seen APT-C2 servers. Wow, this is cool. But then why? Because we've been reporting, and the entire industry has been reporting APT-C2s like in the past 10 years. Did we see them in a list that was like mandatory regulated to be blocked by the entire countries of Europe? No. This only happened because during the war, because they said, oh, it's a matter of urgency, we need to block everything, so we're just going to dump a lot of IP addresses. Are they good? Are they bad? We don't know. Or they might know. They have intelligence, they have briefings, they have like sources of information, but those sources are actually not public. We don't know. Why did you put that IP address? Why did you put that C2 server? Because somebody told us in the briefing. Okay, sure. So this is one case. Then there's another case. So CVE 2022-40684. This is a Fortinet zero-day, you know, like last month, actually exactly last month, today is 10th, yes. So 1 month ago, you know, those kind of 0 days exist, and, you know, like you can't, there's nothing to blame. But my friend here, I have a friend, he works for a company, and then he has like this medium-sized company, and he had these Fortinet routers. And then this vulnerability comes in. 5 minutes? I was told I have 10. Okay, I'll go fast. So this vulnerability comes in. And then, in the past, he would go to his Fortinet routers in the browser history. You can see here, in his history, he was going to like system firmware upgrade, blah, 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 blah. You know, there was this option here to do a firmware upgrade in his browser history. When this vulnerability comes in, he goes there, he goes to like a system firmware upgrade, and the option is not there anymore. And he was like, dude, what the fuck? And then when he tries to go there, like go to the link, system ng and system firmware there, he's greeting with this like 403 access denied. So basically what happened, the router somehow decided, hey, you know, you are part of a company which is not agreed, or I don't know, or like something happened, and the router said, you're not allowed to upgrade my firmware anymore. But then there's this zero-day vulnerability with like, basically, if you could access the admin page, you had access to the router. What do? You have a vulnerable router, you cannot take it out from your network. What are you going to do? So what did he do? He set with his router, vulnerable router, and then he prayed that the attackers will not exploit this vulnerability. So in the end, these examples, what I wanted to show you is that this balkanization actually weakens our security. Just because we are putting fences, just because we are saying, oh, this is your internet, this is my internet, actually weakens the entire security of the whole internet. And I just wanted to show you from all the things that happen, the countries that are listed below, we also have like US and Europe, which are also doing this kind of balkanization. And you have to ask yourself, is this the way to go? Is this the right way to do it? To just say, oh, you know, this is bad and this is good. I'm not here, it's not my job to say what is good or what is bad. But the internet was not created to be separated. The internet was created to be accessible by everybody, and if we work together, if we cooperate together, then we can achieve greater things. Kind of think about like what they're doing in Foundation, kind of, if you've seen like, if you've read Foundation. And then another problem is that what I've seen is that the communication itself, it's kind of in one way. So we have this regulatory body or something, and then they push the data. They say, you know, we've decided this and we've decided that. But instead, in my opinion, it should be a two-way street. It should be like a way where they say, they decide something, and then you can come with a feedback, and this is a democratic way of doing things. You know, I've been talking about problems, I've been talking about issues, but I'd like to give you some solutions. Like, what can we do? What should be done? In my opinion, in my experience, you know, humble experience, I'm not like super like a veteran in this field, in the cybersecurity field, I'm just trying to make my way. I would think that communities that are working together are best. If we have like a community which says to a government body, a government agency, or to whoever regulates, they say, hey, you know, you shouldn't do that. You should actually try to implement this and that, or you've done these things, these lists, those lists are not good. Why? Because this and that. If we have industry cooperation, if we have like partnership with private companies, these help development, and they will try to be improve in a better world. We actually have to try to break the isolation barriers. We have to try to not isolate ourselves. We have to try to work together and step aside from politics a bit. You know, try not to be implicated. Try not to take only one side and say this is good and this is bad, because in the end, the problem is that those in power, they don't have enough competence, in my opinion. I'm not saying specifically X, Y, Z. I'm saying in general. And those with competence, they don't have enough power. And only by having a two-way communication might help us. And the problem is that, in the long run, if we don't do that, and this is a word of warning from myself to DefCamp, to the attendees, you here at DefCamp, people watching online, and then for the future people who will watch the recording. If we don't act now, if we don't think about it, and this is why I wanted to have this talk, to raise awareness, if we don't think about it, in the long run, we'll accept more and more. In March, we accepted those lists of banning, basically balkanizing specific parts of the internet. And then what is going to be next? In the name of security, national security, in the name of protecting against cyber attacks in the war. You know, where is the immediate danger of doing that things? And as I mentioned before, DDoS attacks existed way before this war in Ukraine was, way before they annexed Crimea in 2014. Nobody cared, nobody blocked them. But nowadays, oh, we have to block because it's a DDoS attack. Why? So I would just like to leave you with some really nice folks, really nice NGO. They are actually trying to build a better future for the Romanian internet. They're called like Association for Technology and Internet, APTI. They have like a really nice Telegram channel. And they are the ones who are working on it, who are trying to start a debate, who are trying to talk about those issues, who can do something. And you can do something. So let's start the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Do you have time?
So, guys, let's have a short Q&A session for Dan. Do you have questions in the audience? Yes. Yes, we do have questions in the audience.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. I have a more complicated one and one remark. I'll start with the remark because it's shorter.
Can you
regarding, sorry.
Thank you.
Regarding the list of, let's say, ban this, ban that, because they attacked, they DDoSed our servers. Some time ago, even some Romanian news sites were DDoSed, for example, G4 Media. And Cloudflare was their provider, as far as I know, and they blocked everyone, including me, even though I was not attacking them, but I think they banned a range of IPs. Unfortunately, this meant that I would not be able to access them, and if I wanted, let's say, more independent news, it would be a bad thing. Just to close this small remark, earlier attacks, I think in the Ukraine as well, were started from Romania and US and other countries, I think from vulnerable IoT devices. So again, blocking them is not really the best option. But to ask now, regarding I wouldn't really call it separation, but let's call it the splinternet. How would you consider other hidden services like I2P and Tor? Because, for example, let's say we live under a restricted regime. I'm not allowed to use social media, but for example, Facebook allows you to access it via Tor. But this is a segregation. It's not a public internet, but it helps me. let's say.
So,
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna be brief. We can discuss it later in the short break. I'm sorry you got blocked by Cloudflare. The idea is that it's okay to block DDoS attacks, and then there might be like some sort of collateral damage, but those blocks are not mandated by a government agency. They are like implemented by the administrator of the website. So it's not something that is forced upon the citizens. It's actually something that a website tries to protect itself. And we can discuss a little bit. This is the main difference. I fully support, I acknowledge the fact that Balkanization exists, and Facebook is blocked in China, in Iran, in et cetera, we have to live with it, but the question is we don't have to allow further Balkanization. This is what I'm trying to say in my presentation. And I fully support, I run a Tor bridge, I run a Tor exit node, I fully support those methods because governments are trying to block, and you have to fight against this kind of censorship. I think, sorry, yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Next question.
Hello?
Hey, Dan. Nice to see you again, and thanks for the presentation.
Likewise.
A quick clarification on the Fortinet firmware update issue. Was that because of sanctions, like Fortinet was prevented from supplying services to that IP block or region or company, and then that included firmware?
So I can't comment on the company or on the regions. There weren't any sanctions, but I can say that this is what my friend found on the Fortinet, and we don't know exactly what happened, what made it block, but it happened.
Okay, because I'm thinking, do you think it has to do with outdated or existing legal processes and obligations, but outdated guidelines that are outdated for the internet age? For example, we know in the US they have the sanction mechanism. So once an entity is put on the sanctions list, companies are prohibited from providing services, which include software, which firmware is, a firmware update is software,
yes.
to provide to those entities, and when the list of entities is broad, what would a vendor like Fortinet have to do rather than, you know, stop every service they can they provide to those companies, so they don't risk, you know, litigation or penalties from the government?
This is I would like to answer this one, and I think we can finish. This is a very good point. And again, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not blaming Fortinet. I'm not saying like, oh, you know, like, oh, this is bad. I'm just stating the facts of what happened. There weren't any sanctions in this case, but I'm just trying to say that because of this Balkanization, and I don't know what process, what was the logic, what was the mechanism behind of what led to the blocking of the firmware. I don't know. It may be like X, Y, Z. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not complaining, I'm not blaming the mechanism itself. I'm just raising a warning signal about the outcome. And the outcome was, you are a company, you're using a product, and out of the blue, they say, you cannot update your device anymore. And then there's like the zeroday, which kind of coincidentally happened at the same time. What do you do then? Because initially you say, hey, no, I would like to buy Fortinet because they are the best. I like to buy Palo Alto because they are the best. And then they will say, hey, you know, maybe we would like to block you. But this is not a simple example.
Right. I mean, I assume there is a manual update mechanism that can be triggered from the command line rather than the interface. There probably is something like that.
That's a dirty hack.
Yeah, that's not the point. Yeah, I get it. Thanks for answering.
Thank you very much.